Good morning, ECN family. Pastor Daniel here, just wanting to reach out to you for our first installment of messages on Sunday mornings, hoping to create a semblance where our church body can at least be studying the same word together and the same scriptures together each week. Our text this morning is in Exodus chapter 14, and if you'd like to read along there, you're more than welcome to. You can go ahead and find those. Before we start, though, I'd like to make a couple of announcements. One of those is none of our normal ministry or regular ministry schedule will be taking place. All of those things will be postponed. We'll make decisions as we go further into this kind of process we're all in together, and we'll let you know as soon as decisions are made to start re-implementing those schedules. Another thing that you'll need to know as well is that our grab-and-go ministry, the ministry we began last week in handing out food and supplies to people in our community, will happen again, likely later on this week, but we'll let you know as soon as we make that decision as well. Our staff will get together virtually either this afternoon or first thing tomorrow morning and start looking at the best time for us to be able to make that happen again. So just check back at our Facebook page, ask one of our church members. You're welcome to inquire about that, and we'll be sure to point you in the right direction as soon as that decision is made. And then the last one is a incredible day today. Want to make sure you're aware of that. If you haven't already, reach out to Pastor Jessica. She is celebrating a birthday today, and I know she's having a blast there at the house with her family and girls. And we hear she's turning 29 again this year. She's been blessed that way, so we just pray that she continues to have many, many more years at 29. So happy birthday, Pastor Jessica. Exodus 14 has meant a great deal to me over the years. It's really because it has been a passage I've gone back to a couple of different times in times of a bit of uncertainty. Matter of fact, there's been a couple of times in my past I look back at when I felt as if in some ways I had been maybe even hung out to dry. Wasn't really sure which direction to turn. One of those was preceding September 16, 2001. For some of you, you remember September 11 with very, very vivid memories. You remember what it was like to be there watching things unfold at the World Trade Center. I can remember coming back from class on Trevecca Nazarene University's dorm, walking back in to see my roommate Jeff sitting there watching the TV, and kind of in disbelief, we both watched. I can remember watching one tower that was on fire, and then shortly thereafter on live TV, watching another object get bigger and bigger and hit the side of that tower. Just the terror, the chaos, the fear that was gripping our country in that time. The thing that caught my attention personally, though, was the fact that I knew that coming Sunday I was going to have to preach to a congregation. I had called our lead pastor, who was on vacation during the time, and when I called him, we were talking about the things that were happening and how wild the occurrences were, those sorts of things. I remember asking him if he was going to come back and preach. And I can remember the way my heart felt when he said, I think this is really going to blow over. I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. And I can remember him saying that he was going to continue on his vacation and that I would need to continue to plan to preach that morning. I can remember being as if I were lost, not knowing what words to say, not knowing how will you speak to a congregation in times that in my life I had never experienced anything like it. How am I going to be the one to preach into their world when everything around us seemed to be chaotic? I can remember the days leading up, trying to flip through Scripture, spending time in prayer, just trying to seek and see what it was that God might want me to share. I can remember in that reading through and coming across this story, not a story that I've never read before, not one that was brand new to me, but one that meant something very different to me because of the context I was sitting in. Exodus 14, if you want to follow along, I'd like to read that passage to you this morning. You're welcome to follow along in your own Bibles there in your homes, and we'll read that together. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi-hahiroth between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea directly opposite Baal-zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around in the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart. He will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord.' So the Israelites did this. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, 'What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services.' So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites, who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi-hahiroth, opposite Baal-zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm. You will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." You know, with a bit of irony, the second time in my life that I felt a bit hung out to dry, so to speak, was within a year. In that same setting and context in ministry, there was a time when the pastoral staff who had been there before, due to some very odd circumstances, was unable to be back. I can remember being left by myself as a 20-year-old youth pastor to preach to a congregation where I did not know at that time where their pastor was, what all was going on. I remember having way more questions than answers. I can remember being in college at that time and going to work out in the gym, which was a common thing for me to do, to be able to kind of let off steam and find a place away. I was in there lifting and was thinking through and praying through and trying to come up with the right answer or the right thing to be able to speak to the people in that church about on the coming Sunday. I remember feeling a bit lost in that moment as well. Sometimes when I felt lost, I've always called people I trusted. And so I called an individual that had gained my trust very quickly. He was pastoring a church, not even on the same district. And I'd called him and just kind of told him what my situation was and that I didn't know how to address the congregation that coming Sunday morning. I wasn't sure what to say. He talked to me for a few moments and assured me things would be okay. But he said, "Let me make a phone call and I'll get back in touch with you." I went back to lifting, and some 20 minutes later or so, I remember my phone ringing. It was one of those old Nokia phones. Many of you who had those back in the early 2000s know they were virtually indestructible. I'm sure if you could find that phone again, it probably still works today. But I remember that old Nokia phone, picking it up and answering there in the weight room. And I remember the phone as it rang, and I remember answering it. And as I said hello, the voice on the other side, I didn't recognize the number even as it came up. The gentleman introduced himself as one of the superiors within the church that I worked in, not the local church, but the denominational church. He had said that he had heard that I was in a bit of a predicament and that he was calling to check in on me, which I very much appreciated. I can remember him asking questions and me telling him the whole story of what had taken place and where I was. And at the end of my sharing what had happened, he said some words trying to assure me that things would be okay. But then I can remember when the tone of the conversation changed. And he said, "Well, actually, this is my last week in office. I'll be leaving this coming Friday, and there'll be a new individual who will be in the office on Monday. I'm sure they'll call you, and they'll be able to give you some guidance and direction, let you know what the next steps are." And he said, "And I hope the best for you." And as he was beginning to sound as if he was going to hang up the phone, I butted in a little bit. And I remember saying, "Sir, what am I going to say to this congregation on Sunday morning? How do I answer their questions? What am I supposed to say?" And I remember him chuckling for just a moment and saying, "Oh, son, you'll think of something. I hope the best for you, son. We'll talk to you later." And then he hung up. I can remember at that point in time dealing with a little bit of anger, if I'm to be real honest, but also absolute fear and absolute chaos inside my heart of not knowing what was I going to say to these people who were looking to church to give them some sort of answer. To give some sort of direction, to maybe give some sort of guidance into their world. And I had at that point no clue what to say. I tell you those two stories not as a way to speak poorly of the church, but to acknowledge that even within the church, sometimes we don't always handle things in the best fashion possible. We are still humans working to handle things as best we can. I tell you that story to let you know that there have been multiple times within my life that I have found myself quite unsure of what to say, of how to answer. I find myself back in that situation again right now because people are asking questions as, how long will this last? How long will it affect our lives? How many people do you think will suffer through this? And as people ask all sorts of questions, it doesn't just happen on the streets or in your social media pages or on the phones. It happens in your homes. Many of your kids are asking questions about why they can't go on their vacation. They're asking questions about if they're going to be able to go on their trip this summer or to camp this summer or whatever other things that they may be looking forward to. And you're left with not many answers more than we'll have to see. The place of not being sure how to answer questions is not something that we should be unfamiliar with. As a matter of fact, there is this implied or this expectation upon us as adults, as parents, as pastors sometimes, that we're supposed to have all of the answers. In the story I read this morning, the reason that this story speaks to me so much is because Moses answers a group of people who are questioning why they were ever taken out of Israel, why they were ever led out of Israel into the place that they are now. They're questioning the whole motive, they're questioning the whole process, they're questioning Moses, they're questioning God, and why are you allowing these things to happen? And one of the things that jumps out at me time and time again about the story, Moses speaks to them and he says these words, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Some of your texts may read, "You need only to be calm." You know, sometimes we need to respond to people in their moments of uncertainty and chaos by reminding them that the Lord is in control of all things. We may not know how things work out, but we know that the Lord is in control of all things that may seem chaotic. He has the ability to step in. He has the ability to give us guidance and direction to be able to make it through these sorts of things. I also think it's important to point out Moses didn't know how the story ended when he said that. Pay attention with me. You're reading in those first verses a bit of a narrative of how the story went. But if you place yourself into the story, Moses doesn't know exactly how this works. It's not until verse 15 that we read, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground.'" Picture this. Moses is giving his people the only guidance and direction he knows at that time. He's not telling them how God will deliver them. He's not telling them how long this will last. He doesn't even know how it will end. All he knows is the Lord will fight for you. You must only keep calm. You must only be still. You must only have faith in who he is. I think there are many times in our lives when we as adults especially are left with the feeling, the implication, the implied nature that we are supposed to have the answers. You know, I think I've let go of that a little bit more in my later years. I look back at my life in the times that I felt the most chaotic, the times when I didn't know which way to turn or what answer to give, the times when I was the most uncertain about what would come next. And when I look back at those times now, I absolutely find myself smiling, because it's in the times that I didn't know which way to turn or exactly what the answer was that I was trusting God the most. And it's those times I look back at and see where God was able to do the most through me, because I was left in a world of not knowing the right answer. All I could do was lean upon him to give me guidance and direction. One of the pitfalls of us as we grow older and become adults is that we have this implied need to have every answer, to have everything figured out. I've learned to find peace in saying the words, "The Lord will fight for us. We must keep faith. We must keep calm. We must trust in him." I've learned to find peace and confidence in that, because it is in the times when I lean upon him the most that it seems like he reveals himself to me the most. It's in the times when I find myself the most unsure that I find his presence overwhelming. I'm not sure where that strikes you this morning, but my guess is you, especially adults, have found yourselves in places where you're asking or being asked questions that you don't know all the answers to. Find peace and joy even in not knowing the answers, but knowing the one who will guide you through them. ECN family, I pray that you are well. I pray that these days go by quickly. Whether it's days or weeks we're looking at, we don't know. But regardless, I pray that you find peace knowing that we serve a God who is able to walk you through anything we're facing. God bless.